can just type it in there, even if you don't want to speak out loud. You can type it in there, and it kind of looks like this. I'll just do that. It'll pop up on the side of the screen if you have a question at some point, and we'll pause and ask, respond to that. But yeah, let me get started. Just introducing myself. My name is Dan Sheffield, and I'm a professor here in Canada, teaching in the area of social studies and cross-cultural communication. And I think Mr. Sham has mentioned that I've lived in Egypt and South Africa, and a lot of experience in South Asia over the years as well. I'm also the father of 2 young adult children who are in the midst of their post-secondary education and into early job development. And so I have the usual parental concerns about my kids doing well in their studies and able to get good jobs upon completion as well. Our purpose today is to introduce some of the aspects of a sense of international student life, where the topic is developing a global mindset. And over the years, I've worked with a lot of Mr. Sham's students as they've been thinking about coming to study in North America. And that's our goal today, is to talk about some of the cultural and social dynamics for studying abroad. And so I'm just going to share my screen with you at this moment, and I'm going to put up on the screen. Just make sure everything goes operational. There we are. And so the focus of this session today is looking at our global mindset. What do we mean by that? What's the big deal? Where does culture fit in this whole thing of, as we think about studying abroad? How can we prepare for that? And then we'll look particularly at an issue that we would call cultural intelligence. I'm just going to start right here with a statement that comes from research that is available to anyone who does the exploring. The notion that 1 in 5 Indian students don't complete their studies at top American universities. So that's a reality that we like to put in front of our students. That's been our experience over the years, is that it's not a guaranteed thing just because you get accepted into an international or North American university that you will complete your studies. And we really believe that a good part of this has to do with the conversation today. And so the other side of that equation, of course, is that 4 of 5 Indian students do complete their studies. And we're going to explore a bit today what are some of the pieces of this puzzle. And so the commonly identified reasons why students may struggle with completing studying abroad has to do with things like communication barriers, sort of making sense of what's being said and communicated from the classroom, just the living situation, engaging with different people in languages and ways that maybe are not as familiar. One of the reasons why students struggle in an international study abroad situation is just the difficulty of adjusting and adapting to the new environment. Just how do buses function, using the banking system, using the phone system, just getting around in the different cities where you might study, and that's this difficulty in adjusting and adapting. Language barriers. We think of communication and language as the same thing. We're actually going to explore that in a moment, but we'll come back to this. Differences in the educational systems between India and North American study models. Also, students struggle with social isolation. Leaving behind family and friends to come and study abroad is a factor in students not doing well. And then interestingly, one of the reasons that some students don't complete is because they focus only on academic achievement. And you'd think if students just focused on their studies that they would achieve. But interestingly, that single-minded focus on academics can actually lead to difficulties in actually succeeding. And so we'll explore that a little bit too. Interestingly, when you look at these first 4 points here on this list, communication barriers, difficulty in adjusting, adapting, language barriers, and differences in educational systems, all of those issues or concerns have to do with culture. That is, in one way or another, those challenges for international student life have to do with differences in cultural understanding. And that is what we want to explore today. This question of where does culture fix in the overall mix of things? When a student has been accepted into a Canadian or a US or British university, that's really just step one. And sometimes we think that's such a challenge in itself, just to get accepted. And we spend a lot of time and energy on that, and that's not today's discussion. But then the student has to arrive in North America and, as we say, live and thrive for 3 or 4 years, or however long your studies take, in a different social and cultural environment before you actually ever get to graduate and achieve what you've set out to do. And so this question again, where does culture fit in this picture? Well, it's right in that middle section there, living and thriving and surviving. And getting through that experience is a factor in defeating those 1 in 5 statistics. We might ask, why are cultural factors so significant? Well, interestingly, students, and again in our experience and other research validates our own experience, that students are often socially and culturally overwhelmed early in their experience abroad with the differences they're experiencing. And just on that kind of mental side of things, what this amounts to then is affecting mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual balance. And again, in our experience, this is an ongoing challenge for international students, which then, of course, directly affects academic performance. And so maybe doing fine academically, but if these other social and cultural factors are beginning to affect the mental health, then that will certainly impact academic performance as well. So how does developing a global mindset impact this equation? Let's think of a global mindset as a way of describing acquired abilities which help a person function with cultural fluency. Okay, so we talk about language fluency, and so students obviously who are going to study in North America need to be competent in the English language, but in fact, language is really just a product of a culture. Language is a means for people of that culture to express themselves. And so what we need to understand, what's really needed here in a sense, is cultural fluency. And developing a global mindset is the doorway to cultural fluency. So it's one thing to have acquired English language, but if we're going to be living in an English North American cultural setting, we also need to understand the culture that produces that language. So we say that the building blocks of a global mindset are motivation. Am I motivated to participate and to learn, or am I being pushed to do this? Paying attention, am I observant about what's going on around me, and do I adjust my perspective because of what I've seen? Am I prepared to gain some knowledge about what the differences are? And will I then adjust my behavior to make the most of this, this international experience? And leading us, of course, to why you would want to do this. So graduates with a solid education and a global mindset are a hot commodity in the international community. And I think for any student that's thinking of leaving their own country to go and study abroad, that this has to be part of what you're thinking about. Is saying, I'd like to be able to participate in the global economy, so to speak, and I want a North American education as a foundation for that. But interestingly, this business of can I adjust from culture to culture as I participate in this process. So let me tell you a story. There's a story of an American advertising executive working for Coca-Cola, and he is assigned to develop an advertising campaign in the Middle East. And he says, well, okay, this is I have my qualifications, I understand how to communicate a story, and I'm happy to take up this opportunity to work in the Middle East. And so he says, you know, this is like a no-brainer almost. You know, this is hot, thirsty countries in the Middle East here, and why wouldn't Coca-Cola go over as a big seller in this setting? And so he designs an advertising campaign, and he uses images. He's going to put these on billboards on the side of the road, and his idea is to place these billboards and various dimensions of his campaign as a visual objective. And so he's got this picture of a guy out in the desert, and he's here thirsty, he's exhausted, and of course Coca-Cola comes to the rescue, and because of this he's alive and alert, and he carries on his way. Okay, so this is this American ad executive's idea for what to do for this campaign in the Middle East. So one of the things that as he's telling his experience to a friend back in North America, his friend says, well, that sounds like a great, you know, all visual advertising. It's very clear what the objectives are, and should be very appealing. Interestingly enough, the fella said, yes, but that got me fired. And his friend was quite like, how could that be possible? And he said, well, the one thing that I didn't come to terms with was the way that culture shapes the way that people understand even something like advertising. And so he said, you know, it was only after some time and after the failure of our advertising campaign that I realized in the Arabic script that you read from the right to the left rather than from the left to the right like we do in North America. And this is just a way that a society, even the viewing, is conditioned, because reading and making sense of written script. And so, of course, if you follow the story of this advertising campaign from the right to the left rather than vice versa, you could see how potentially this might damage his campaign. And so the question we ask is, through whose lens are we looking at the culture? Am I looking at a particular culture that's different from mine through my lens, or am I looking at it through the lens of the people of that culture? Now, you might say, well, that's, you know, kind of a humorous way to look at this topic, but it illustrates how culture does have an impact on our desire to participate with competence in a globalized world. So again, where does culture fit in this picture? Okay, so I want us to think for a moment of human interpersonal dynamics using this pyramid that we've got here, okay? So at the bottom of the pyramid, we have human nature. And those aspects of life that are common to all human beings, wherever we live in the world, things like eating and sleeping and working and loving and bleeding and dying. We might say that this is the common hardware that all of us as human beings start off with. That's the basic foundation. Into this mix then is culture. Those aspects of life that are shaped by the unique social or group environment in which we're raised during our early formative years, usually ages 0 to 12 or up to 16. Things like language, history, education, religion, family, parenting patterns, geography, physical environments. And so we say this culture is like our operating system. So I'm kind of using IT imagery here. Culture is like our operating system, so that everything we experience day by day is organized automatically through this software of the mind. Okay, and then of course, a third dimension of human personality is what makes us, in a sense, unique from other people. And it really represents, however, the smallest portion of our pyramid here, and therefore our identity. Things like our family of origin that we grew up in that's different from other families, even in our own neighborhood. It might have to do with our unique personality, temperament, life experiences that we've had that nobody else has had. And those things create the things that are unique about us, but and also different from people even within our own culture. And we think of this kind of as our individual identity, or we might say in IT terms, our user interface. I just got a new computer here in the last couple of weeks. I went from a Windows 7 computer to a Windows 10 computer, and I keep having to figure out how to make use of Windows 10 because I've been using Windows 7 for about 10 years or more. And so that's the user interface, but yet the guts of the computer are all organized by the Windows software that is a way of organizing how the computer works, which is what I have in common. Let me just illustrate how this might actually show up in practice. So Raj and Sandra have basic human needs in common, but culture is going to shape how they organize those needs. Sandra is an American girl. She's probably going to roll out of bed around 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning, unless she has an 8 o'clock class. And she's probably just going to pick up a coffee and run off to university, to the campus, and she's probably going to eat lunch around noon and have supper around 6 or 7 o'clock in the evening, and then go to sleep about 11 or 12 o'clock at night. And her normal study time is late in the evening, 8, 9, 10 o'clock. That's when she's going to be studying in her room. We got Raj, the Indian guy. He gets up early. He has his shower. He does his prayers before making a good breakfast, because, you know, he'll eat at 1 or 2 o'clock, but it'll be just a small late lunch. He needs to make a phone call home to his family at 11, 12 hours time difference. So he does that before going out to classes. He actually prefers to study in the late afternoon, 3, 4, 5 o'clock. And he'll have, of course, a late supper, maybe 8 or 9 o'clock. And then, you know, he heads off to bed by 10 o'clock or so. Now, those are two life patterns that's not even anything about Raj and Sandra that makes them unique. That's just the stuff of sort of the basic cultural DNA of how one society works in terms of a schedule for students. However, if Sandra and Raj are assigned to work on a project together in a study group in one of their courses, they're going to have to negotiate. So when are we going to study? Are we going to study late in the afternoon? Are we going to study late at night? And those are patterns that are, to a large extent, shaped by the society in which we grew up. And so, again, that question, where does culture fit in this mix of challenges? So we say that culture is the total way of life of any group of people. That collective programming or the software of the mind that distinguishes one group of people from another. And how we handle these social and cultural differences, in a sense, will really determine whether you're able to live and thrive in this new environment. I like this statement from Gandhiji about learning and about culture. I do not want my house to be walled in on all sides and my windows to be stuffed. I want the cultures of all the lands to be blown about my house as freely as possible. But I refuse to be blown off my feet by any. I really like that statement because, as we know, Gandhi traveled and lived in various parts of the world and came back to India. And as his statement says, being informed by insights from different cultures and informing how I live my life and how I think, but also wanting to stand on who I am and my own cultural identity, not to be knocked off by my feet by thinking that I want to turn into an American or a Canadian just because I'm studying there. So this goal, so you're accepted, you're on campus, you're trying to live and thrive, and the reality of student life sets in: long study hours, massive libraries, lab groups, tutorials, tests, exams, one assignment after another. And all of this is being done within a North American educational framework that may operate with significantly different values and approaches than the secondary school where you've studied. For instance, your marks at your secondary school in India look good on your application for acceptance, but as we've discovered, often the SAT results actually suggest that what gets evaluated in North America is different from what gets evaluated in your Indian secondary learning situation. And then we think of learning in a second language where active participation in the class discussion is valued, where terms and phrases and idioms may be expressed in a manner that doesn't make sense to how you have learned to use the English language. Then you're talking to your fellow students, your peers, and student tutors. These are ways that might actually help you make the difference between good work and excellent work. And so the question is, will you be comfortable in making use of all the resources available to you when you do feel somewhat like an outsider? The academic expectations, what the professors expect, may not be clear, or they may be worded in a manner that's confusing. You might get behind on readings and assignments very quickly because in those first months of university in North America, you might just get overwhelmed with everything in those first few months and get behind, and in our experience, sometimes really struggle to get back on track. Will you understand how the professors are grading you? Here in Canada, at the university or high school level, the marking, the grading system is such that a B+ mark is someone who has accomplished all the objectives of the course content. So you can do everything that the syllabus asked of you, and what you will get is a B+. You have to actually produce outstanding work if you want to get an A or an A+. And often that's a discouraging, just that framework for how marking happens. A+ is not good work. A B is good work. You've done what we asked of you. An A+ is work above and beyond the call of just good work. And so we do find students discouraged sometimes by those realities. So our goal, of course, is to achieve our objectives, and but we're going to need to navigate those experiences of just living and thriving to get through to achieving our objectives. So, for example, here in your present education, if you don't understand what the teacher or what the professor is saying, would you put up your hand and ask her to explain the lesson in a way that you can understand? Okay, that's a simple enough question, and you can think about your day-to-day experience. You're sitting in a classroom with 30 or 40 other students. North American universities, often in first year, you could have 100 or 200 students in a class. Are you going to put up your hand and ask the professor or the teacher to explain because you're not quite getting it? Well, actual research tells us that an Indian student is less likely to ask the instructor for an explanation, whereas an American student is more likely to ask the instructor for an explanation. Now, you may be the Indian student who always puts up your hand and asks the questions, and that's can be quite true. What the research is saying that in general, 75 of 100 Indian students would be less likely to put up their hands than an American student would. Okay, now why would we do that? Well, often, of course, the teacher or the professor is an older person, someone you're supposed to respect. They may have a PhD if you're at university. This is a person with very advanced education. They have a position of authority. This amounts to the fact that they are a person with more status or power than the student. And if you've been raised in a culture where that kind of hierarchy of positions, that really says I'm not, in a sense, worthy to ask this person a question, and you may struggle. Interestingly, of course, so the research here suggests when we think about how culture influences something as simple as asking questions in the classroom, the Indian student says, look, this instructor has power or status above me. Will the teacher even acknowledge me, or will they get angry if my questions? And you maybe have had some of that experience. Interestingly, the American students say, look, what do you mean? This teacher has no power or status over me. I'm here. I'm paying my tuition so they can teach me. I have every right to ask a question. That's really the attitude of many American students. The other side of this, another cultural dimension, we might say, often the Indian students, when you think about your present life situation, how many decisions have you made by yourself? Often it's kind of mom and dad, auntie, uncle, grandpa, grandma. These are the ones who are often making decisions for you, and that's been part of your experience. Again, North American students, 15, 16 years old, are already saying, look, I make my own decisions. I don't care what my parents have to say. And so when you come into a university classroom, and you've already got, these are just kind of two dimensions of how culture is shaping the way students and the educational environment work, we can see that this could be a bit challenging. So getting accepted into a North American university, as we say, is just really the beginning of the process. And how are we going to manage these significant social and cultural factors that can affect the actual academic performance? Will you survive this crucial transition period? So in our experience, and we've worked with a lot of students over the years, everybody is in a process of developing. And part of what we do in our process is to help each student understand how their personality is developing. You're moving in a certain education and career direction, and in grade 9 what you thought you wanted to do, and grade 11 and 12 what you thought you wanted to do. Even in first year university, a lot of students will change their course program. So we're all in a developmental journey, and the same is true with this living and thriving in an unfamiliar culture. We all start off in a sense as babies, not knowing what to do, and then we begin to develop capacity to do this. And so that's in a sense what we're paying attention to here today in this brief kind of webinar, is to say, are there ways that I can prepare for this process? So I'm gonna take a moment and just, we've still got a few more things to, but I'm just gonna go back to the screen here and ask if anybody has a question or a comment about what we've said so far. Any thoughts, comments, questions? Feel free to put them out there. Has anyone got something that I know we're kind of in a webinar here. We don't really know who else is. We may know a couple of people on this webinar, but we may not know others. So I'll carry on. I'll reshare my slides here, and we'll carry on with our work here. So I'm going to ask you to work with me on a little exercise here, okay? I've put on the screen here how to prepare. We want to enhance our cultural intelligence. Let me just make sure, there we go. So you've heard of IQ, which is short for your intelligence quotient. And that's kind of a way of assessing certain aspects of intelligence. You may have heard of the term EQ, or emotional intelligence. How aware are you of your emotions and how they impact your life and your relationships? We're going to add another to this, CQ, or cultural intelligence. Okay. Okay, I see a couple questions that come up here. Yes, okay, so how exactly do we participate in an international culture? Okay, that's in a sense, that's exactly where we're going right now, Rupa. And so thank you for raising that question. So what I'd like you to do is, I would like you to have a little piece of paper and a pencil or a pen, and I'm going to put some statements on the screen, and I would like you to consider the statements and your response to them, Okay, so this is a little, you don't have to hand this in, but it's going to be a little quiz that's going to ask you some questions, okay, or some statements and your responses to them, okay, and this will help us respond to what does it mean to participate in another culture. Okay, so the first statement I have on the screen, and what I want you to do is to rank your response to this statement. Okay, let me give an example here. So mindfulness. When I'm going to be involved in a cross-cultural situation, I plan carefully before I meet with someone who is from a different cultural background. After one of those experiences, I carefully reflect and try to make sense of the interaction. Okay, now, if you have had very little or any experience with other cultures, this may not be something that you've ever thought of. And so that would be where you would you would write down a 1. Okay, so on your piece of paper, if you have very little experience with cross-cultural or intercultural situations, and therefore haven't even really thought about a question like that, you would put down a 1. On the other hand, at the other end, 5, you have a fair amount of experience with other cultures, and you say, yes, when I am going to spend some time with my friend from Ghana or my friend from Korea, I think about how that experience is going to go, because I want to learn from them and I want to be aware of what's going on. And so we talk of this as mindfulness. So if that's something you think about every time you meet someone of another culture, circle a 5, okay? So, or depending on your experience, put down a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, or a 5, okay? So that's the first statement, and you have on your piece of paper, you've put down a number between 1 and 5. 1 being very little experience with doing something like this, 5 with a lot of experience of doing something like this. Okay, the next statement has to do with knowledge. This statement says, I generally understand other cultures and cultural values. I know about the basic ways in which cultures are similar and the ways they are different. So again, in your life experience or you're in your education experience, if you have done a lot of exploring about other cultures and read about other cultures and their values and why they do things a certain way, and how cultures are similar and how they're different, if you have a lot of knowledge about cultural differences, you would put down a 5, okay? On the other hand, if you really haven't done much exploring of other cultures and how they work and histories and their values and what's common and what's different, if you haven't done much of that at all, you would put down a 1, okay? And then between 1 and 5 on the basis of your experience and knowledge of other cultures, okay? So you've put down a number for this second statement. The third statement here has to do with motivation. I'm very interested in other cultures, and I enjoy meeting people who have different cultural backgrounds. I am confident that I can live in different cultures and that I can adapt to different parts of the world. Okay, now this doesn't say anything about what you know or what you don't know. It has to do with your own personal motivation to learn. Okay, so we're saying I'm very interested in other cultures. I enjoy meeting. Again, if you have done this, you've met with other people from other cultures and that's been a really positive experience for you, and you're confident that I can figure this out even if I don't know much, you'd give yourself a 5, okay, about your motivation to learn and to grow. On the other hand, if you're a bit more timid, if other cultures don't really have any interest to you, I just want to study and do my education, then you might put a 1, okay? If you're shy or you struggle a bit with interacting with people who are different from you, you'd put something down on the lower end of the scale, okay? So that's statement number 3, and you've written down a number for that, okay? And then here's our 4th statement, okay? And this has to do with our behavior, how we actually act or conduct ourselves. This says, I modify my behavior to make others more comfortable when I interact with people who are from different cultural backgrounds. I change the way I speak and act when I am in cross-cultural settings. I mimic or copy others to make sure that I follow the local conventions or practices so that my speech patterns and my body language are not offensive. Okay, now this is an interesting thought. It's the idea of, do I understand how my speech, how the way I talk, how the way I act, how the way I dress might influence people in one way or another? And am I prepared to change and adjust on the basis of what I have learned? Okay, so again, thinking about your own experience, have you had situations where you've been in places where people think and act and conduct themselves differently? And have you adjusted, or have you thought about adjusting? Or is that really a strange idea to you? And so give yourself a 1 where you have very little experience with this, or a 5 if you have a lot of experience with this, or someplace in between. Okay, so this is a simple little self-assessment. You're not going to hand this in. It's really just a way of helping you think about where your cultural intelligence might be at the moment. Okay, so you're going to score yourself. So you've got 4 numbers there. If you scored yourself, your total of those 4 numbers is between 4 and 7 points. You have self-assessed yourself as low in cultural intelligence, okay? If you scored yourself with 8 to 16 points, you see yourself as moderate in cultural intelligence. If you scored yourself with 17 to 20 points, you see yourself as high in cultural intelligence, okay? And so that's an interesting little way of thinking about this. Now, just to recap this, the mindfulness is this ability to pay attention in a reflective and creative way to cues in intercultural settings, okay? Knowledge is the awareness of the role of culture and how cultures vary and how culture impacts behavior, including communication. This is knowledge. Motivation has to do with your interest and desire, your inquisitiveness. Are you curious? Do you want to learn? Do you have a sense of confidence about yourself? And then behavior is developing competence across a wide range of situations that enables discernment of the appropriate responses. That is, do I know what's appropriate and inappropriate when I'm in different cultural situations? So this little self-assessment is useful as a way of understanding where you might be able to do some advanced preparation for the social and cultural challenges that are coming in your near future. When we think about the potential to be socially and culturally overwhelmed with the differences, just think about how you have self-assessed yourself, okay? Are you paying attention to what's going on around you? Are you learning and acquiring knowledge? Are you curious? Are you motivated? Are you self-confident? Are you prepared to make appropriate responses and adjustments in your behavior to fit in the situations where you find yourself? And so your score there has a way of helping you think that. If your score was lower on one or another of those factors, then you may want to do some more work. And we have a little kind of one-page document that gives a few thoughts on how to improve or develop each of these 4 factors of cultural intelligence. But of course, our desire is to put overwhelmed behind us so that we are able to maintain our mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual balance, which of course is leading us towards our academic performance and doing well in our studies internationally. So one of the things that comes up sometimes is students saying, well, but I have had a fair amount of experience. I've spent a month or 2 in Britain with relatives there, or in Houston, and went shopping with my friends at American Mall, and I've watched TV series or movies, and I really do have. And one of the things, again, that the research tells us is just having international experience does not correlate with effective ability to transfer skills and knowledge in a new culture. The research tells us that it's actually this mindfulness, knowledge, motivation, and behavior that is really most significant, rather than just have I visited places and had certain experiences. And so we encourage our students to proceed with a desire to learn and investigate. That's the way through the struggle of being overwhelmed with the differences. And so we suggest that confidence in your ability to adjust to the new environment, that this is actually found to be more important, we might say, than having realistic. You can have all the information, but still be overwhelmed by it. And so we say, pay attention to this confidence of this desire to learn and pay attention and to gain knowledge, and be prepared to adjust. As I said, we'll send along this one-page document with a few ideas on how to improve your cultural intelligence. The crucial thing is that we try some situations where adjustment is required rather than avoiding them, and that we think and talk through some of the potential adjustments that we know may be coming to us in advance. And so I'm going to conclude here. And yes, okay, so Lahar asked that question, doesn't that confidence in CQ come with international experiences? The one piece that I'll throw into that as a response is to say we can have the experiences without reflecting on those experiences. Often people have international experience, but they perhaps have not actually tried to figure out what was going on there. What can I learn from what happened positively or negatively? And so just having the experience doesn't necessarily mean that we have actually acquired cultural intelligence, okay? So the experience, the cross-cultural setting or experience that we've had is only helpful if we use it as a lab. If it's just an opportunity to sort of look on as an outsider, we may not have fully participated. So having confidence means I'm going to dig in and explore beyond just showing up and observing. And so that's the thought there. Any other questions or comments that people might have? Feel free to turn your mic off or put a note in there. I'm conscious of our time, but we do want to, if there's any specific questions that people might have, we'd be happy to respond to them. Okay. Well, I don't want to, I know this is later in the evening for you there on your side. It's midday here in Canada. But right, okay, so Ryan has asked the question, how do you deal with cultural conflicts? So that's a really good question, and probably more than we can answer right here on this webinar. But again, I'm going to go back to our cultural intelligence. So the first thing that that I ask myself when I'm one of the things that I think about is if my internal temperature has gone up. So if I feel frustrated or angry, or I feel like I'm heating up on the inside because of a situation that has happened, this question of so that, to me, that's a clue that there's something wrong, is when I start to feel a bit heated or a bit disappointed, some kind of an emotional reaction that I have. And so I ask myself, so what's going on here? That's mindfulness, okay? I'm paying attention. I'm saying, what is it that's going on in this situation? Describing it from the other person's perspective, understanding why am I reacting in the way that I'm reacting, acquiring some knowledge. What was that conflict about? Did I misunderstand something? Motivation, am I interested in resolving this conflict, or am I just interested in getting angry back at the person who caused me a problem? And then, of course, what am I prepared to change or adjust? So that's the behavior side of CQ. And so, to me, that little 4-step process in regards to cultural intelligence is a key factor for helping make sense of conflict situations. Of, am I paying attention? What's going on? What do I need to learn? Am I motivated? Do I actually want to resolve this? And what am I prepared to change once I do understand what's going on? And yeah, it is interesting of things that we perceive as conflicts, and what may be just misunderstandings because we don't have enough knowledge. So yeah, so yeah. Well, that's so the little one-page sheet that we'll send to you gives a couple of ideas on each of those 4 factors of some things that you can do. And so that, some of you are each of you are at different stages. I know some are, we have some high school students, we have some present university students, we have some people that are anticipating coming to university here in the next the next month or so, ready for the fall start in North America. And so everybody's at different stages, and so we may find some opportunities to give some specific assignments for those who are motivated to actually do some work on this. But good. Are there some other thoughts or comments? Questions? Good. Well, you all have a connection with Mr. Sham, and so if there's something that came up in our conversation today that you'd like to follow up more, then we will follow up, and feel free to ask him any questions that we could follow up on with a personal connection on there. Yeah. So. Okay. Yeah. Good. Okay. I think we're gonna. Yeah. I think the process of because each person online here is at a different stage of where you're at, we have different assignments would be appropriate for different people as you prepare and learn. But so I'm going to sign off, and I trust that this has been a positive learning experience.